that visit resulted in the Trump administration suspending military aid and even halting intelligence sharing with Kyiv. Zelensky did, however, reach out to the U.S. president saying he regretted the incident, and today we have both sides now sitting down for those talks on how to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the meeting would be important to gauge to see if Kyiv is willing to make concessions for peace. We can now bring in our international affairs editor, Kethevane Gorjestani. Kethevane, I guess that begs the million-dollar question, or more, really, of what concessions Kyiv is willing to make.
Yes, and I think what's important when you listen to Marco Rubio speaking to a reporter ahead of this meeting, he was being way more diplomatic than what we've heard from the White House, which is we just want to see if Kyiv is ready for peace. What he's saying is basically that he's not going in, as he said, going in to set any conditions on what they have to or need to do. What he's saying he's doing in these meetings is gauging where the Ukrainians are, what concessions they're willing to make, and then doing the same thing, he says, with the Russians to see where the Russians are standing. So basically listening to the two sides to see how big the divide is and how likely it is that they can get those two sides to come to the table. So that's at least how he's presenting the matter. The thing is, we have heard the American side say what sort of concessions they could be expecting from the Ukrainians. We've never actually heard anyone in the Trump administration talk about what concessions they would be wanting from the Russians. And the Russians obviously so far have not publicly said anything about possible concessions. They've simply reiterated over and over again what they want to see Ukraine make as concessions, basically saying that Ukraine needs to drop its NATO bid in order to have a possible peace deal, that Ukraine recognized that the controlled territory right now by Russian forces has to be recognized as Russian, so territorial concessions. Ukraine, on the other hand, is not talking about territorial concessions yet. They are coming into this meeting with the Americans, proposing the outlines of what could be a possible temporary ceasefire to see where things are going. That partial ceasefire would apply to sea and to the air, and also involve possibly, according to Ukrainian officials, some release of prisoners. This is their attempt to show the Americans that they're really willing to discuss a peace. That's their response, the Ukrainian response to, yes, we are ready for peace and ready for talks. This is how we're planning on doing it. And finally, there's something that was interesting that Marco Rubio said about the rare minerals deal that was seen as a sort of precondition to any peace talks. Marco Rubio said very clearly that this was not a precondition, that he's hoping that this deal is going to happen. It's not going to be top of the agenda. And he said that this would not prevent talks about peace negotiations from going forward, even if that deal is not actually signed.
Now, Kethevane, as these two sides sit down in Jeddah, we have military chiefs from 30 European and NATO countries, as well as Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan meeting here in Paris to discuss security guarantees for Ukraine. So what exactly is this gathering here hoping to achieve?
Well, look, first of all, the idea, that's the broader idea, is to create an international force that would be able to deter possible future Russian aggression in the event that there is an actual ceasefire that is agreed upon. This is the sort of culmination or latest step, if you will, of the Franco-British idea and a plan to create a coalition of the willing. That's why you're seeing members, NATO members, EU members, and beyond sort of coming together, because the idea for this meeting is to assess what each country is able and is willing to bring to the table, whether it's troop size, whether it's where where those troops could be, what possible weapons each country is willing to share, what possible air support, naval support, so the logistics of what each country is willing to bring to the table. But even more crucial, and that is why you're seeing that this is the military chiefs meeting and not necessarily the defense ministers or the ministers of foreign affairs, is what military options are we putting on the table in the event of a Russian transgression of that ceasefire? What type of response to a Russian attack, for example, or how fast that response would be, and also the question of what chain of command, because there is no chain of command right now among all these countries.
Indeed. Interesting. We'll see what comes out of that meeting later. Thank you very much for that, Kethevane.